The year 2019 has been a very interesting year, but it has also had some difficulties and challenges. In this study, we'll be looking at some of the challenges and also looking at the future plans and also what it takes to make a video for Even at the Doors.
The narrator purchased a Sony camera a couple of years ago to improve the quality of work, and when working on a future project on creation, filmed a number of creatures in London's Natural History Museum that have become extinct over thousands of years, that included species like the flying reptile, the pterodactyl, the woolly rhino that once lived in Europe, the saber-toothed tiger that once roamed Afro-Eurasia and the Americas, the flightless bird endemic to New Zealand, the moa, the mastodon, a distant relative of the elephant found in North America, a woolly-mouthed skull found in England, the Aristnotherium of Africa, the best preserved skeleton in the world of a stegosaurus discovered in America, the Mantellosaurus dinosaur discovered in England, the giant elephant bird egg of Madagascar, the heavily armored Glyptodon of South America, the huge relative of the armadillo, the giant sloths of South America that just towers over modern man, and the largest creature that has ever lived, the blue whale. And the narrator will be researching how these enormous aquatic mammals that roam the depth of the ocean ended up at the highest point above sea level in both the Andes Mountains in South America and the Himalayan mountains in Asia. Researching was running smoothly. Then the LCD screen of the camera stopped working, and the frustrating technical problems of 2019 started to begin. When the narrator completed the filming for the study for geoengineering, it was a roller coaster ride from there. After the editing was complete, the narrator tried to render it into video format, and for some strange reason, after 3 attempts over a number of days, it wouldn't come out. And the video had been completed since June 2019. Frustration started to kick in. This was on the laptop. The narrator had to now transfer it to an iMac with a more up-to-date 2019 edition of Adobe Premiere. And if you don't know how to work the settings, you're stuck. And one had to go through many different tutorials online, and the video was finally able to upload in October 2019. Then there was more dramas. The narrator went to put the video on the website and did not renew the domain page. A company brought it, and the narrator had to go on a bid to buy it back and repurchase it. GoFundMe also wouldn't allow the narrator to collect his funds, and a few people who send funding via PayPal to Even at the Doors were also having problems sending money. And even after the study of geoengineering, many of the YouTube to MP4 sites were blocking videos from being downloaded, which someone across the Atlantic said they were also experiencing the exact same thing. This is why 2019 has been a challenging year. Now, the narrator is not sharing this with the viewers to feel sorry for him and to play the violin. As annoying and discomforting as it is, this is the nature of the game, and when you invest into large projects and controversial topics, you will get problems. And sharing and standing for truth is beginning to get a lot more problematic. The narrator has been telling people for years that the main objective of social media is to acquire your personal data. For Freedom House, a US government-funded NGO, published a study titled Freedom on the Net 2019, and it confirmed that social media has become a conduit for surveillance and electoral manipulation, where governments harness big data for social media surveillance. And of the 3.8 billion people worldwide who have internet access, 71%, that is almost 3/4, live in countries where individuals are arrested or imprisoned for posting content on political, social, or religious issues. The same study showed a picture of a Punjabi police officer monitoring social media channels at the Punjab Integrated Command, Control and Communication Center in Lahore, Pakistan. And this surveillance of social media is slowly building up to a global shutdown on free speech.
YouTubers beware. Beginning December 10th, your channel could be removed, access revoked, and effectively banned at the sole discretion of YouTube, which of course is owned by Google. A new terms of service was sent out by the video platform just a few days ago, and in it, there's a line that reads, YouTube may terminate your access or your Google account's access to all or part of the service if YouTube believes in its sole discretion that provision of the service to you is no longer commercially viable.
You know, there are many ways we work and collaborate, with the U.S. government. We care about our national security as well. We wouldn't be able to do what we do as a company if we didn't enjoy the freedoms, that we get and cherish. Just last week, we had significant revisions to our hate speech policy. At YouTube, we are very focused on removing harmful content and reducing the spread of what we think of as borderline content. Just last quarter, we removed over 9 million videos, and so it's an ongoing process, but there's more we need to do, and we acknowledge that.
The CEO of Google and Alphabet Inc. openly admits to CNN that Google works with the US government and that they have removed 9 million videos at the time of that interview, which they have labeled as hate speech, that also includes videos from the platform of Even at the Doors. In the video on the Balkan Wars, the narrator received messages from Serbian people all around the world who said it was one of the very few videos they have seen that showed the Serbian side of the Yugoslavian conflict. It has now been removed. They have put warning signs on other Even at the Doors videos, but 2 of them have totally been removed. That includes one that covers the State of Israel. Though the study documented that the top Israeli general compared the state of Israel to Nazi Germany, and even if NGOs say they torture children and violate human rights, the Jewish lobby group, the ADL, has played a significant role in purging free speech, and now the US government, in the middle of December 2019, will remove federal funding from any university in the United States that speaks out against the state of Israel, which they have called and labeled anti-Semitism.
But today we're taking another historic action. In just a few moments, I'll sign an executive order to combat anti-Semitism. This action makes clear that Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits the federal funding of universities and other institutions that engage in discrimination, applies to institutions that traffic in anti-Semitic hate.
While President Trump signs away free speech in line with YouTube's new guidelines, there is one outspoken Jew by the name of Norman Finkelstein whose parents survived the Holocaust, who the narrator has never seen anyone beat him in a debate because he presents raw facts and data. And he tells us what is the real reason of shutting down free speech, especially against the state of Israel.
If you look at the history of this, what's called new anti-Semitism, since the 1970s, every time Israel faces a public relations debacle, they start up with the new anti-Semitism. I read the polls. I read the data. It hovers between 6 and 8% are hardened anti-Semites in British society. It's nothing. So morally, it's unacceptable to try to police people's thoughts, and politically, it's a complete disaster.
So as you can see, there is a very intense global war to shut down free speech. And as YouTube has taken down 6 videos of Even at the Doors, it is time for a plan B. So I'll be working on 2 very intense studies. One will be looking at the past, and the other will be covering things taking place in the present and preparing you for the future.
Freedom Under Siege is a study in the making. It wants to explore the covert plans that have been in the pipeline for years to totally eradicate long-cherished freedoms. It will start with the Protestant Reformation in 14th century England and the attempts to completely crush free speech by English monarchs, men like
You will not topple this King Henry V of England you so underestimate.
This king not only used his army to make war with his neighbour France, but also used it to destroy any public meetings in England of people who wanted to worship freely, especially a group of reformers called the Lollards, the followers of John Wycliffe. There is a pub in central London in England in memory of the most famous Lollard, a soldier and nobleman, Sir John Oldcastle, a former friend to King Henry. But when King Henry warned him not to publicly preach, he refused and put God before King. It cost him his life, and he became the highest ranking Wycliffite or Lollard martyr to die for his faith in England, and this was as a result of the laws of the state. Moving centuries into the future, we are living in a closely surveillance world where freedoms are intelligently being removed under the guise of fake news. Children are being used as pawns as an emotional weapon to alert people about global environmental damage, and even the religions are getting drawn in. Is climate change a concern, or is it, as one top government advisor said, nothing more than a cleverly designed, well-financed movement that is being used as a front to distract us from the true plans of total government shutdown on every civilian worldwide? The narrator spent 5 years of his life in both college and at university studying media. It was one of the best years of his life. You were taught the influence of the media over the civilian mind that includes newspapers, magazines, music videos, films, and the global power of the internet. The efforts institutions make to sway our worldview is interesting and sometimes frightening. And even when researching, the narrator has to be careful not to get too enticed even by the very things he is observing. There are many studies that are being published on the influence on mass media, public opinion, and its effects on foreign policy. And films are desensitizing young people to violence and are cleverly training them to submit to the government and not fight authority. And they are slowly desensitizing us while secretly preparing us for the not too distant future.
Guy, this world, it's a video game.
The world's moved on, Commander Bond.
You were 00?
2 years.
The world is arming faster than we can respond.
The world is arming faster, and even in a time when many states struggle to feed their civilian population, they seem to find money to buy arms, the biggest sales since the Cold War. But while these nations are morally crumbling, there is something that gives us the greatest insight into world affairs. In the closing stages of the 7th century BC, a Babylonian monarch had this weird dream that really freaked him out and deeply troubled him. It was an image in the form of a man that comprised of 4 different metals, and this image was eventually destroyed. Unbeknownst to him, it was a panoramic view of human history that chronicled 4 major world powers. As it was written in symbols, today we can break down the coded language of that dream and clearly understand the closing stages of that vision and what it means to us today. In the prophetic book of Daniel, chapter 2, verses 34 and 35, there are some key words that are highlighted in red: stone, chaff, wind, and mountain. 4 different things that took place at the closing stage of the prophecy. The stone symbolically represents Christ, as he confirms in Matthew, and seconded by Peter. The chaff symbolically represents the ungodly. The whirlwind represents destruction and desolation, and a mountain symbolically represents a kingdom. This is how you unlock prophetic language. The man who received this vision was a brilliant architect whose engineering skill still stands in Iraq today, even amongst the 21st century's destructive US-led imperial wars. His name was King Nebuchadnezzar II, the founder of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and even though his eternal destiny is secured, at the time of the vision he was scared, but still very big-headed. In the British Museum in London, England, his name has been preserved on bricks, where a couple of years before the vision, he defeated the 26th dynasty pharaoh, Necho, to secure his place in history, as recorded and preserved in the book of the prophet Jeremiah. His Babylonian kingdom was symbolically described as a head of gold, like this gold helmet from Ur of the Chaldees in the British Museum. Also in the British Museum is the Babylonian deity Umdugud that has a head of a lion and wings of an eagle that was also used as a symbol of Babylon to represent the first of the 4 world empires. The Medo-Persian Empire in neighboring Iran succeeded Babylon, and the oldest petroglyphs in Iran and the oldest pottery in Iran has the indigenous animal imprinted as an insignia of that country, and there are also artifacts of the ibex in the Iranian section of the British Museum, where that second kingdom is symbolically described as the ram with 2 horns, years before it became a respected world power. Greece is known for its naturalistic art and its buildings with huge columns to support its framework. This kingdom succeeded and overthrew Medo-Persia and was the 3rd kingdom. The man who fit that prophetic calling has a coin in the British Museum. He is Alexander the Great. And the horn that is on his head is a very fitting description to how he has been described in the prophetic book of Daniel. The 4th and last kingdom is Rome. But there are many who think that China and Russia, with its pipeline deal, will rise up and become the world's dominant global players. And as the papacy is being rocked by sexual scandals, there are many who think that there is no way it can recover. But the 4th kingdom will get a big help from a much younger power.
America is the greatest and most powerful country on earth. Is that understood?
Who will use its economic and military strength to make the entire world give it complete homage. But how have people come to this conclusion? Who revealed this to them? It is one who has feet like brass, face as lightning and the sun, eyes as fire, adorned with a golden girdle, and has a distinct voice, the true author of both of the books of Daniel and the Revelation. Revelation was written on this small little island called Patmos. But how can you understand it? One man gives the best description. The Apocalypse is, in brief, J.A. Wiley said, a history of the church, written in grand symbolical characters from the ascension of Christ to his second and glorious coming. The key of the Apocalypse is to be sought in the Old Testament scriptures. And this is the briefest and perhaps the best rule that can be laid down for the interpretation of this book. What does he mean by that? In Genesis, man lost the tree of life. In Revelation, he gets it back. In a literal Megadon in the Middle East, God intervened in a battle. In the global battle of Armageddon, God will again intervene. The plagues that fell in Egypt will be repeated worldwide. The hail that was dropped on God's enemies will be poured out worldwide. Ancient Babylon literally fell. Modern Babylon will spiritually fall. In ancient Babylon, a death decree was passed on those who didn't worship the image. In Revelation, there will also be a global death decree passed for those who do not worship the image. In Genesis, there was death. In the earth made new, there will be no more death. So amidst all this global madness, the book of Revelation not only forewarns you of what's to come on this earth, but prepares you for the restoration in the earth made new. And this is what the narrator wants to cover in the study, Freedom Under Siege. This is just a quick newsflash. But as the narrator has always looked at the world as a big jigsaw puzzle, trying to fit the missing pieces together, there is another study that will take us right back to the beginning of time. The dream project of the narrator is a study on creation, and clearly showing how this earth came about and the detail and intricacy it took to create every size, color, and shape. Though it will cover the vegetable kingdom and the animal kingdom, the focus will mostly be on man, the crowning work of creation. Men and women come in all different hues with different hair texture and different hair color and different color eyes, showing the diversity of a very skilled designer. Wouldn't it be boring if we just all looked the same? Scientists are beginning to closely examine how intricately designed man is, and deep down inside, he marvels. He can see that when he is not either criticizing or killing each other, he is just scratching the surface on the detailed makeup of the human body. But how advanced were the earliest of men? When a small number of men and women migrated from Ararat in Asia Minor to repopulate the entire earth. On the continents of Afro-Eurasia, there are many different artifacts that are being discovered whose engineering genius clash with the official accepted academic view of early man. The River Nile in Africa is the longest river in the world and the primary water source of both Egypt and the Sudan. West of that river is the Great Giza Pyramid Complex. It is known as the biggest archaeological puzzle on the planet, for no one knows when it was built or how it was built. It is geographically located exactly in the center of the land mass of the Earth, comprises of 2.3 million stones weighing a ton each, covers 13 acres, it is 481 feet high, 756 feet long on each side, the most accurately aligned structure in existence. It is so advanced that the Great Pyramid of Giza, even with modern technology, its construction would be a challenge to both engineers, workers, and geologists, according to Forbes magazine. In Renaissance Italy, according to modern standards in measuring the whole of mankind, Leonardo da Vinci has been described as the greatest genius who has ever lived. While closely observing the horse, the most domesticated of all animals, he would draw some very detailed sketches of this creature, from its hooves, forelegs, tail, and head. But he was thousands of years behind, for the earliest Ice Age art of Europe on ivory and stone shows how advanced the earliest inhabitants of Europe were. They were so advanced that scholars have had to admit that not even Leonardo surpassed this level of expertise, according to the London Guardian. In the Indus Valley civilization in modern Pakistan, ancient India, were discovered some pieces of metal. They didn't look like anything interesting when they were discovered, but scientists took them to this lab, the Synchronoton Soleil near Paris in France, and when they closely examined it with the most advanced modern-day technology known as photoluminescence imaging, they discovered that the earliest inhabitants of South Asia made these objects with technology that is still being used today, and it was shown that this is the earliest example of lost wax casting in history, and the amulet was created with technology that is still used by NASA today. And these artifacts in Afro-Eurasia confirms that the earliest of men were more advanced than us today, which is a very big challenge to those who believe that we are the most advanced since written and oral records began. Many of the most respected academics come up with all sorts of opinionated theories on these early artifacts, but the narrator is not interested in wild speculations, but deeply respects honest men who can closely analyze subjects with a trained eye and a balanced academic skill, who do not leave people with doubts. at the Imperial College of Science and Technology in South Kensington in southwest London. At the opening of the 20th century, one of its top lecturers who taught at the Royal School of Mines, an English mining engineer called William Goldland, published a book in 1912 titled Metals in Antiquity, and even at a lecture in memorial of one of the strongest advocates for evolution. This trained engineer allowed the facts to outweigh the theory, and he said that it is often assumed that before man became acquainted with metals, he was a mere savage, but little superior to the wild animals of his time. But that this view is entirely erroneous. Certainly as regards late Neolithic man is incontestably proved by the evidence presented so clearly to us by the vestiges which have been laid bare of his culture and mode of life. He was a farmer, kept domestic animals, was acquainted with the art of weaving, the manufacture of pottery. His dwellings were constructed with considerable skill, and at his death buried with ceremonial rites. Such were the men who were the discoverers of metals and the first metallurgists. They were, in fact, men possessing greater intelligence and a higher culture than is usually attributed them. And if we ourselves were deprived of metals, I hardly think that we could surpass them in the exigencies or even the arts of everyday life. The Bible in Genesis chapter 4 and verse 22 is clear that the earliest of men who walked this earth knew how to construct and work with different metals. But where did he get that wisdom from? In a book titled History of the Negro Race by George Washington Williams, a 19th century African American Civil War soldier, politician, lawyer, journalist, minister, and historian, he wrote and said, "It is fair to assume that God gave all races of mankind civilization to start with. We infer this from the known character of the Creator." So this is just a taste of a project the narrator would just love to complete. Now whether it would be accomplished, only God knows. As tomorrow is not promised to any of us, we just have to live each day by faith.
I'd really love to spend hours just working on the study on creation, but I'll be solely focusing on freedom under siege. That's of more importance. And when my website is back up and running, you can download it just for a small fee. For the women who are complaining that the videos are too long, they'll be breaking down into 4 parts. Now in this next study, I'm going to show you how I produce and make videos. And for those of you who English is not their first language, when I say the words "don't ramp with God," it means don't play around with God. And when I say someone is being blazed while getting a trim, it means they're being criticized while getting a haircut.
To put together a video for Even at the Doors does take quite a lot of time, for the research is quite intense. There are always ideas racing through your head constantly, and when you start a topic, you are always wondering how you're going to get through the end of that vast maze, how you will get to the finish line, and sometimes it's difficult for the mind to get rest. As the narrator has a biblical worldview, he uses a divine mandate to assess every topic, and the Bible instructs that he use 2 or 3 witnesses as a balanced approach to measure any topic. One source isn't valid. From a humanist approach, this is known as qualitative research, one of the best, if not the best method of approaching a topic, which is where you use a variety of different original sources to support your case. When the narrator was researching the Caribbean island of Haiti, to better understand its history, he spoke to a friend of his who is a Haitian American who could give a first-hand account. When the narrator produced a study on the Ukraine, he went out into the march in central London that included demonstrations outside of the Russian embassy. The narrator also stumbled across young people from Hong Kong protesting in Parliament Square in the summer of 2019 against laws to be imposed on them by China. In order to understand the background to that conflict, the narrator in recent years came across the works of a British journalist called Mark Curtis and purchased 3 of his books that gives probably one of the best background insights into British colonialism and its impact it still has on the modern world. A 19th century Protestant historian said, "To understand the present, we must know the past." This is a biblical principle, for it teaches that history has a very strange way of repeating itself. Man never seems to learn from the mistakes of the past. He does the same thing over and over again. And one of the reasons it is important to know the past, because an English statesman famously said, "History is written by the victors." So the narrator will spend time in different museums to study the cultures of different civilizations. The narrator has also built up his own personal library since a teenager, but research never ceases, so one still has to go into second-hand bookshops on Charing Cross Road, comic bookshops to see the world from an entertainment perspective, socialist bookshops to see the world from a communist perspective, New Age bookshops from an occult perspective, Catholic bookshops from a papal perspective, and Protestant bookshops for both a religious and a historical perspective. A Protestant writer was researching the reign of the English Tudor monarch Elizabeth I and saw that Catholics were rewriting history so that the world would view them as martyrs. So he wrote a book titled Jesuit Plots, and he said, "Never trust a historian that does not quote from official, authentic state records." So since the late 1990s, the narrator is a member of the British Library that has the 2nd largest book collection on earth, and the National Archives in Kew, southwest London, that holds the official state documents of the UK. The narrator also looks through the many different channels for interesting documentaries to get a different angle on a topic the narrator is researching. One has to daily look through newspapers, not only in the shops but also online, to see what is going on in the world from different perspectives. And he also looks at the different news channels to look at the world through a mainstream Western colonial lens, and other news channels that approaches a pressing global story from a completely different angle. The narrator likes people to stop and think, and one thing he will never do in his research is hack into anyone's personal private files to acquire data. It is unethical and disgusting. If a journalist wants to produce a story and humiliate another person, that is up to them, not the narrator's style. The Bible teaches that you should never attack a man when he is low, vulnerable, and down, for God would not be happy with it. You never rejoice when someone falls. Why? In case you end up falling yourself. You have to always be mindful of that. If God is merciful unto us, where his mercies are renewed every morning, we have to also be merciful to others. Before the narrator uploads a video, there are a number of things you have to consider. You have to know how to study and counter arguments. The church institution will avoid social issues and will not train you for the everyday realities of the real world. And you have to be able to confront fierce opposition and carefully study what has happened to people before who have spoken out. Pat Tillman was once one of the most famous American football players. He abruptly left the game after 9/11 and joined the military. While on duty in Iraq, he became disillusioned at what he saw. This was the highest profile individual in the whole of the US military. After his duty in Afghanistan, he planned to return to the USA and meet with Noam Chomsky and expose the US-led wars as documented in the London Guardian. But before he could leave, he was killed. That is the price you pay when you want to do an expose. Whether you agree or disagree with WikiLeaks' founder Julian Assange and his expose of the US's secret classified government data, they are going to make an example of him as a warning to others not to speak out about the atrocities the Western governments commit around the world. But these things, honestly speaking, do not bother the narrator. If there is one thing you cannot worry about when on the battlefield for the Lord, is death. That should be the least of your worries. You should also never let the attention get to your head, for you can easily lose focus of your mission and God warns that the people who are praising you the loudest in the church will be secretly scheming to topple you. You have to be a tough militiaman for the kingdom of heaven, and you not only have to study secular history, but daily drink from the fountain of the Holy Scriptures to renew your strength, for the number one attack will be against the Bible, not only outside the church, but inside the church also. When did this assault begin? These manuscripts discovered in Nag Hammadi, Upper Egypt in 1945, and the gems on the top left and right hand side belong to a sect called the Gnostics, from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge, who have been traced back to the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. As this book documents on page 31, they try to mythologize the Bible, saying that it is nothing more than an allegory. They believe that every religion was one secret doctrine, and they rejected sin, miracles, devils, and taught that man couldn't overcome sin, and taught that humans can achieve salvation through their own strength without any outside divine assistance. In a nutshell, look to man and not to God. This ideological system was to reach its full potential and zenith with the rise of the papacy, a system that exalts mortal man above God. The 16th century English statesman Sir Thomas More, whose statue lies in Chelsea in southwest London, would torture people in his own house who put the Bible in higher esteem above the Catholic Church. But he had a nemesis. And in Whitehall Gardens in the Victoria Embankment is a statue of an English martyr, William Tyndale, overlooking the very river that smuggled in his Bibles from off the continent, the River Thames. He put the word of God above the authority of the Catholic Church, and it cost him his life. But the struggle continues. Italian Jesuit and Cardinal Robert Bellarmine taught that the Bible contradicts itself, but the 16th century English author, theologian, and Cambridge professor and Doctor of Divinity William Whittaker responded to his argument and said the Bible only contradicts itself to those who clearly don't understand it and read it properly. French professor of medicine Jean Astroc, a Protestant convert to Catholicism, is credited as being the father of textual criticism. But a German biblical scholar, Johann Gottfried Eichhorn, expanded upon his hypothesis and reintroduced that neo-Gnostic argument, the rationalistic crusade against the Bible, a phrase he coined and titled higher criticism. But don't ramp with God. For Dr. Francois Samuel Louis Gosson, a 19th century Swiss Protestant scholar and apologist, counteracted the Gnostic and higher criticism arguments in his famous work, The Plenary Inspiration of the Holy Scriptures, where he skillfully dismantles each argument. But one man took it even further. The 19th century English politician, archaeologist, and author Sir Austin Henry Layard wanted to prove the Bible not only intellectually but visually, and he is not only responsible for reintroducing the Assyrian Empire into the British Museum, but he records two famous kings in the Bible in his famous work, Discoveries in the Ruins of Nineveh and Babylon. The first is Tiglath-Pileser III, who was an 8th century BC monarch that founded the Neo-Assyrian Empire. His name is mentioned in the Bible because of his invasion of the northern kingdom of Israel. The second is Taharqa, who was a 7th century BC black African Nubian king from the Sudan, who also ruled the 25th dynasty of Egypt. He is known as Africa's most famous king, and he formed an alliance with King Hezekiah when his Nubian army protected the kingdom of Judah against the brutal Assyrian army of Sennacherib. That is why Isaiah preserved his name in the Holy Scriptures. Augustus Caesar founded the Roman Empire, officially in 31 BC, and it was under his reign that brought peace and stability in ancient Rome, and he is also mentioned in the New Testament in the Holy Scriptures. But despite this overwhelming evidence of these artifacts in the British Museum, millennials are leaving the churches in their record numbers, disillusioned with organized religion. and the worst people you have to deal with as a Christian are bitter Christians who leave the church with a bad experience. When the hurt hasn't been healed, they strike with a vengeance, and if you're weak in your faith, they will cripple you in a debate. And when an actor starts their career promoting Northern European occultism, they also pioneer this Gnostic anti-God movement. Famous men in academia are lecturing on it. Bitter scientists are advocating it, and entrepreneurs are also drawn into it. When Pew Research, one of the most famous think tanks, surveyed who classify themselves as atheist or agnostic in the USA, 78 to 79% of them are white, and many of them are using social media to share their views. In a study on Christmas, one man commented, "There is no God or gods. Never has been, never will be. Grow up." Now, true science is about investigation and observation. And if you have never left this earth, gone out into space, and toured every galaxy, star, planet, meteorite, and black hole to see what's out there, then you have no argument. People don't even know who are their neighbors at the end of their street, but want to lecture you about what is not in space. But don't think that this movement of unbelief is just targeted to the white community.
So, you see, the reason why people are moving from religion is because they realize they've been bamboozled. They realize that they've been taught symptomatic thinking. That means I just tell you stuff and it's not based upon nothing real. We know that the Bible and the Quran and all of them are not history books. It has nothing to do with history. It's somebody's personal philosophy. And what people are finding out is that what they thought they loved about Christianity, what they thought they loved about Islam, is ancient Kemet, the teachings that's coming from ancient Kemet.
When a lot of black men are on lockdown, they get exposed to these views, and once they are released, they aggressively share them. And the number one debating arena for these views is the barbershop. And the narrator has been told that many black Christians are blazed while getting a trim and are told that they are following a white man's religion. Many of these post-slavery black movements started in the 20th century and are geared to give blacks a so-called new religious and racial identity so they can connect with their long-lost African roots. When the narrator has told blacks to research where these ideas have come from, when you tell blacks to read a book, how do you think most of them respond? They don't like to read, but all of their ideas come from Europeans. The later John Henrik Clarke was one of the most revered black intellectuals. He was one of the first to advocate that the Bible was borrowed from African religion, and he embraced the Gnostic worldview that the Bible is an allegory. But where did he get these ideas from? Gerald Massey Macy, the highly discredited 19th century English poet and writer, was the first to teach, with no evidence to support his claims, that Christianity had its roots in ancient Egypt. And this school of thought crept into the corridors of academia. The first two of the Ten Commandments clearly instructs to keep far away from pagan idolatry. But James Henry Breasted, a US archaeologist and Egyptologist, while excavating the vast idolatry of ancient Egypt, insisted that the Ten Commandments was borrowed from ancient Egypt. He believed it was taken from the Egyptian goddess Ma'at, which is very laughable, but blacks admit that all their ideas are from whites. These are their own words.
Well, I recall James Henry Breasted, who was a famous American Egyptologist at the University of Chicago, established the Oriental Institute in, I think around 1935. James Henry Breasted got in trouble for saying that the Ten Commandments were derived from the 42 admonitions of Ma'at.
Many still embrace views that are not based in facts, and their next attack is Jesus.
Black Jesus premieres Thursday, August 7th at 11, 10
You really gonna extort your boy Jesus Christ, man, your Lord and Savior.
We're agnostic.
Man, we can't front you no more, dog.
You do realize I died for your sins, right?
That was 2014 years ago.
Yeah, that's old.
I like messing with Christians, man. Because they easy to get. You can get on their skin quick, you know. Telling me Jesus died on the cross. I don't buy it. Jesus could feed 1,000 with a loaf of bread, walk on water, raise the dead. You telling me he couldn't handle 3 nails?
Jesus was born under strange circumstances, and she had to be put away privily, as the Bible teaches, because if she were seen pregnant, the law was, where's the husband? Where's the father? Well, you say Holy Ghost, but we know there's no human being born without the agency of a man. That's real.
The greatest hindrance that black people have is white Jesus.
The real reason why I believe black people truly won't fight back with white folks is because of religion. In our mind, we keep forgiving white people because in our head, subliminally, we see Jesus.
Many blacks have now rejected the ticket into eternity and are now delving into witchcraft with the belief that they are now reconnecting with their ancestors, and they think that they are now woke. Sadly, they are about as woke as a colony of mammals going into deep hibernation during the winter. For whites are also rejecting the ticket into eternity and are also embracing witchcraft. And Asians are also doing the exact same thing. It is a global pagan revival. And anytime there is a new interest in spiritualism, paganism, or the occult, there's always this one power that embraces the modern trends of the times and then suddenly leads out in this rebellion, preparing the world for the final showdown on earth. None of these individuals are aware that they are following the philosophy of the son of the morning, the father of lies. And what took place in the beginning of time will repeat itself at the end of time. God gave our first parents clear instruction that if they obey, they shall live forever. But if they disobey, ye shall surely die, God said. This warning was challenged, and one word changed the course of human history. Ye shall not surely die, the serpent said. And to this very day, man believes that lie.
Once we escape this tomb, which some people call death, which doesn't exist as it relates to how they define it, but let's just use that term.
Death is a fiction. It doesn't exist.
As you can see, men will believe a lie far quicker than a truth. And what many within the Black conscious movement think is a teaching distinctly unique to their community. It is nothing more than a pagan teaching that can be traced right back to Eden, that you can find in all cultures around the world, especially the belief that mortal man is a god. The second error taught to our first parents.
You are the deity. You are the God you've been looking for. You are the God.
We are the gods now.
Not only has the narrator have to deal with black militants, but has received complaints by enraged people who believe that even at the doors shouldn't be a platform to address black issues. And individuals have also made personal attacks to the narrator of a racist nature. On a video on slavery, a person commented, "You give tree monkeys a little schooling, the pseudoscientific colonial-minded belief that whites have civilized blacks, and they come up with all sorts of bleep to fit their pathetic narrative." Now, how do you respond to a comment of that nature? By following the divine mandate of not lowering yourself to an individual's ignorance, but rising way above it. You'll have to go back in time to trace where that mindset came from, and the archives of Germany will hold a clue to a famous humanist philosopher who has influenced modern secular thinking. Africa, Hegel says, is no historical part of the world. It has no movement or development to exhibit, the land of childhood. The Negro exhibits the natural man in his completely wild and untamed state. Now many will say, well, those were the views of his times. But at the same time, a Christian scientist from Scotland viewed Africa in a totally different light. And real men of God do not see one race as better than another, but gives each race their rightful place in history. And Thomas Dick said, "The woolly-haired Negroes of Africa are distinguished by their black color, their flat noses, and their thick lips. Africa comprehends the following kingdoms: Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, Egypt, Zara, Negroland, Guinea, Nubia, Abyssinia, Kaffraria, Dahomey, Benin, Congo, Angola, and various other territories." He obviously knew something that Hegel didn't. When Europeans came to Africa, they knew about Nzinga, the Queen of Angola. They knew of the Nubian queens of then Christian Sudan. They knew about the kings of the Congo, who had a highly developed state at the center of an extensive trading network. They also knew of the huge Christian kingdom of Abyssinia, what today we call Ethiopia, and its richly embroidered attire of its highly educated kings and their afros. But there has been an attempt in Western academia to erase blacks out of the records of modern human history. No other ethnic group has received such treatment, and many hold on to the ideas of their Western heroes. Thomas Jefferson said, "But never yet could I find that a black had uttered a thought above the level of plain narration. Never saw an elementary trait of painting, and highlighted in red, sculpture." In the 20th century, they discovered these metal sculptures in West Africa. They were made from a style called lost wax casting. But what shocked people was the skill that went into this naturalistic art, and the British newspaper The Independent in 2010 gave a review of this medieval art and said, "Sculptures discovered in Nigeria and neighboring Benin, created by African hands, indigenous people, is now accepted by the curatorial community that the advanced artistic techniques used to create and highlighted in red, the sculpture were more advanced than those of Renaissance Italy and comparable to those of the artist Donatello." Scholars are now producing journals, slowly admitting how civilized Africa has always been, from the largest stone structure ever built, the walls of Benin, other unknown kingdoms in Nigeria, a lost civilization in the Sahara Desert, the richest human being in all history in Mali, West Africa, Mansa Musa, and the oldest illustrated Bible in the world in Ethiopia, formerly Abyssinia. When scholars closely examined this priceless gem, London's Telegraph newspaper said, "The Garima or Garama Gospels were written on goat skin in the early Ethiopian language of Ge'ez and are thought to be the earliest example of book binding attached to the original pages." For the blacks who call Christianity a white man's religion, and for the whites who believe that they have civilized blacks, they should both pay a visit to Ethiopia and see some of the most beautiful churches that have ever been built from solid rock. And thinking of churches, where do you think the narrator receives his most fierce criticism from? There are Christians of different denominations who watch the studies and earnestly look for some theological or historical error, and when they can't find fault, they use an unbiblical strategy called ad hominem. Texas State University gives probably one of the best descriptions of this cunning, intelligent attack method. It says that instead of addressing someone's argument or position, you irrelevantly attack the person or some aspect of the person who is making the argument. The fallacious attack can also be direct to membership in a group or institution. The narrator also receives covert attacks from people inside the church institution he is a member of, and like all the other Christians, they provide no scriptures, but like to pressure an individual to be like them and not like Christ. There are many individuals in the corporate, academic, and in the religious world who cave into this pressure and put the tribe before the truth. This psychological method has been titled in 1976 as groupthink. It is when a group allows no independent thought of any individual within that community. Though it exists in the corporate world, it is far worse in organized religions, especially inside the churches, and they use two unbiblical methods to keep their members from straying from the flock: deep apocalyptic fear and emotional guilt. And many are going through counseling and weekly therapy, recovering from the deep psychological trauma of groupthink and its strict, ungodly Gestapo-like methods. You see, a church is meant to provide help, support, guidance, and relief. And Jesus said you should never run a church as a religious dictatorship, for heads of autocratic governments exercise dominion and authority upon their subjects. And Jesus makes it clear what he thinks about groupthink. He said, "It shall not be so among you." The reason the narrator does not cave into groupthink, because Jesus said you cannot put any institution or any individual before him, because under intense pressure, the same institution, as well as family and friends, will eventually sell you out and hand you over to the authorities to be killed. The narrator knows there is only one true tribunal in this universe he has to give an account to for the things he has done on this earth. As this study comes to a close, as the narrator was born, raised, and lives in London, England, to complete a video, one has to find new locations to film in, and you are led to Hyde Park Corner, Trafalgar Square, St. Paul's, Marble Arch, Vauxhall, and Westminster, just to name a few. And when you are filming, you have to make sure that people do not walk into a shot. You then have to get your hundreds of video footage and label them. Once that is completed, you have to write your script for each study. When that's completed, you have to do a voiceover, and sometimes 1 minute can take 1 hour. You then have to edit, and most of it is really drop and drag. Then you have to get your different music genres and sort out your sound levels so that the music does not drown out the sound of the narrator's voice. And before, during, and after, you have to constantly pray. For the warfare is not won through debates and arguing, but when you are on your knees. You then upload the video and pray that it reaches to the four corners of the earth, and that individuals who are searching and seeking for answers will be exposed to the true God in heaven and secure their place in eternity.
So this was just a quick emergency study, just in case YouTube and its digital AIs decide to play the Inquisitor General and shut down the channel of Even at the Doors. If not, I'll still continue doing videos. But I'd just like to say again, for those who have supported myself through words of encouragement or finance, I want to just say thank you. For those who have been very, very critical, I'd like to say thank you as well, because the more criticism is the more deep my research gets. In the meantime, as I always encourage you, please research everything that is presented in all the videos of Even at the Doors.